Hey, remember Rage? It was that light gun game that Jesse played late in season 4 or 5 of Breaking Bad. Remember that game? I kid. Rage was a perfectly fine game that took too long to come out. I remember little about it. I remember mega textures and being extremely underwhelmed by the visuals on the mess of a PC port at launch. I remember the shotgun being pretty okay. Some of the enemy hit reaction animations were neat. And I remember the ending sucked. Rage was ultimately unremarkable across the board, and personally a bit of a disappointment, but a forgettable one. Rage came and went quickly and seemed to have been forgotten and lost to time. Until in May 2018, when Walmart Canada posted a bunch of upcoming games in their database, one of which was called Rage 2. It seemed like someone at Walmart Canada was having a little laugh. Most of the games seemed like logical predictions, but Rage 2? No. Come on, no, it's not happening. Nice try, Walmart employee. And then Bethesda announced Rage 2 as a video game and then it was coming soon. It was really quite the twist. One of the most unexpected sequels I can think of in a very long time. A sequel to Rage? Really? Well, here we are. Rage 2 is out, and you know what? I've had a pretty good time with it, specifically the combat. Rage 2's combat is a tremendous amount of fun. It starts off as a very basic shooter with just a machine gun and nothing in the way of exciting abilities, but the further in you get, the more you unlock, the better and better the combat becomes. You're thrown out into the open world and can chase down arc stations, which will then give you a new combat ability or a new weapon. All of these arcs are accessible from the opening tutorial section, but some of them will be much harder than others due to increased enemy difficulty. I really recommend chasing down as many of these arcs as you can early on, because without them, the game will never come alive. It's the abilities, more than anything, that make Rage 2's combat so enjoyable. While not all of the abilities are exciting, one of them is just a shield you throw on the ground. The majority allow the combat to become increasingly faster, more frantic, and open up a lot of mobility options. The first hour of the game it'll play like a standard Call of Duty shooter, but an hour later you'll be double jumping and dashing around, and then another hour or two after that you'll be creating a vortex underneath you, launching yourself into the air and ground pounding back down, then zipping back and forth around the battlefield. There's a lot of nice synergy that comes from playing one ability into another, and with the way the health system works, basically that enemies drop health for you constantly, combined into making a combat system that really rewards pushing forward constantly. It's something that Doom 2016 did tremendously, and it's done really well here. Cover shooters are getting boring. Getting up in the enemy's face is far more exciting for me. You also get a good selection of weapons to choose from, though they aren't as strange and exciting as I'd have hoped for. All of the weapons feel great to use, they handle wonderfully, sound good, and hit hard. It's familiar stuff, an assault rifle, a really great shotgun, a rocket launcher, alongside some more sci-fi weapons like a Gauss cannon or revolver that fires remote detonated thermite charges. The weirdest and most enjoyable gun in the game is this grav dart launcher, which shoots darts into an enemy and then you select a point in the environment and it pulls the enemy to that point very quickly. The more darts, the faster they move. If you're doing it right, the enemy flies and splats against something. It's a weapon that consistently makes me chuckle when using it, but I wish there were one or two more guns that were as strange and consistently funny as this one. Don't get me wrong, all the guns are great fun to use, but the grav dart launcher has a lot of personality that I'd like to have seen more of. One drawback with getting new abilities or weapons is that you are forced to go through a tutorial for each of them, and they just get in the way. Each is maybe only 2 minutes long, but they take place in a bland training environment that you have to load in and out of, and don't teach you much of anything that you wouldn't just learn from using the abilities or weapons naturally for a minute or two. The game also pops up XP bars and progress updates immediately after you complete something, interrupting the flow of the game, which can be frustrating. It usually happens right when combat ends, so it doesn't get in the way of the actual shooting, but it takes me out of the moment and I really don't know why it wasn't just integrated into the HUD and has to interrupt you instead. There's also fall damage, which can be gotten around via the ground pound ability, but if you fall for too long, or more specifically ground pound from too high, the game detects that you've been falling for too long and just kills you? It's only come up 2 or 3 times, but it's a real buzzkill when it happens. I'd be happy if games just stopped having fall damage altogether. The game is also very easy on normal difficulty. I eventually pushed it up to hard, and even then you'll almost never die. And if you do get killed, eventually you just get the ability to revive yourself after a little mini game. I just figured I'd mention it. I don't regard it as a negative because I like the easier going fun of just destroying every enemy, but I know for some people that difficulty is an appeal and Rage 2 is just not difficult. Having now beaten the game and spent a lot of time with the combat, I continue to enjoy it. It's one of the rare combat systems that, when the combat ends, I'm filled with a feeling of, whew, that was fun. It puts a smile on my face. There are not a lot of shooters that make me feel that way anymore. Doom and Titanfall 2 were the last ones that hit those highs. Rage 2 isn't as tight and focused as something like Doom, mainly let down by level design and especially enemy variety and AI, which is very standard, but it comes close for me at times. It falls somewhere between Bulletstorm and Doom with an emphasis on pushing forward and keeping a multiplier going. It's stylish, frenetic, hits hard, and it's just damn fun. All of your abilities and weapons also have upgrades that can be applied, enhancing their functionality in fairly expected but welcome ways. You can get faster reload speeds for weapons, fast lock-on speeds, a second dash ability, or longer hang time for enemies launched by the gravity vortex. It's standard stuff, but they add up to make you feel even more overpowered than you already are. The biggest fault of these upgrades is the menus for them and the different upgrade currencies. The upgrade menus are scattered across different tabs which lag weirdly when switching between, and applying an upgrade often doesn't have any sort of confirmation sound, which is a small thing to nitpick, I know, but the lack of it makes the menus feel rather cheap. Then there are the different currencies you earn from activities. Feltrite allows you to unlock some upgrades for abilities, but then you need nanotrite boosters to unlock the perks inside the abilities. Feltrite also opens up the ability to add weapon perks, but those perks need weapon mod points to buy. And then there are projects, which are more passive abilities, and you earn project points by completing activities. There are even passive player buff upgrades like weapon damage increases, but those are only gotten from a vendor. It's all a bit of a mess, to be honest. There are even vehicle upgrades too. I forgot to mention that Rage 2 is an open world game, and so you have a car, or a bunch of cars, but one of them can be upgraded. The driving is fine. It feels a bit stiffer than it should, especially turning, but I don't mind it. The main negative with the driving is that there just isn't much to do while driving. Now, I am a bit weird, and I actually often enjoy downtime in games where you are doing almost nothing, like driving a car across an empty desert road, but Rage 2 has too much traversal downtime. You will occasionally find yourself in car combat against a convoy, and the car combat is also fine. It's very basic, but it looks good, especially the explosions, and it's something to do while driving, so it's fine. But there's very little of it. Convoys are few and far between, and the only other vehicles that you might sometimes see on the road are friendlies. From time to time you might find an AI driving around that'll offer to race you, but that's about it. I think the game should have found better ways to make the driving more engaging. Again, I don't mind it all that much, but there is objectively very little to do while driving, and quite a lot of driving needs to be done. There are also races that take place on a track, much like the original Rage, and something feels wrong with them. Not only does the movement and camera often feel herky-jerky, but the car handling model feels off. I only did the one race that is required to progress through the main story. It took me 3 attempts to get through it. I had a bad time, and I have never gone back to it. The open world driving I've enjoyed, it's harmless, but the track driving was just no fun at all. Now, there will be a lot of people who say Rage 2 didn't need to be an open world game, or at least not such a vast open world game, and I think that's a very fair complaint. I'm torn on the open world aspect of it. For starters, I have bounced off of most of the straightforward open world games this generation. Games that follow a Ubisoft-like formula of having a ton of abilities to check off of a list just don't do much for me anymore, but on rare occasions, the stars align and I'm in the mood for some mindless open world checklists. And for me, Rage 2 was one that clicked. I don't know what to say. Almost every single side activity in the game involves combat, which is the best part of the game, so you have an enormous number of places to visit to engage with that excellent combat. The open world nature means you can approach these outposts or camps or encounters however you want. For example, there's an upgrade for your car that gives you an ejector seat so you can drive at full speed right at an enemy outpost and then eject out of your car and then ground pound down to start combat. Some outposts might be on the side of a cliff as well, meaning you get to have a ton of fun with the gravity gun. It's small stuff like that that makes me appreciate the open world nature of the game. The extra freedom you get from the open world gets me to experiment more with the combat possibilities. And as I said, I was in the mood for some basic mindless open world checklists. It doesn't happen often, but Rage 2 came out at a time when I was ready for it. So I think in practice, I'm fine with the open world part of it. That being said, the open world should still have more variety. I would have especially loved for some activities that were more exploration and platforming focused, as the movement abilities really do become quite capable. There's a little bit of exploration when it comes to finding storage containers, but not enough. There's also one activity that involves you fighting a large sentry turret, and one of its attacks requires you to jump to dodge, but again, it's not enough. The movement systems and abilities are extremely enjoyable, and I wish they had taken advantage of them across the game a lot better. Doom did a great job of integrating platforming and exploration, and while it's a different game of course, it would have been nice to see some of that design leach into Rage 2. There are also linear story missions. These take place in buildings, facilities, or underground layers in the world. There are 9 of them, I believe, maybe 10, and the whole story will take maybe 15 hours to complete, and that includes doing quite a decent amount of side content. Completing everything in the game would probably take more like 25 or 30 hours, though. It's rather a refreshing length for a game after so many open worlds of late have been unnecessarily long, in my opinion. Personally, one of the most disappointing aspects of Rage 2 for me is actually the story and tone of the writing. If you haven't seen any yet, the trailers for Rage 2 sell the game as being extremely over the top and full of satirical writing, and I really started to like the tone of the trailers. It was obnoxious and over the top in a way I could get on board with. The reality, though, is that the story and writing is almost entirely self-serious. There are a few flashes here and there where the game gets a little more lighthearted, but 95% of everything that is said or written in the game is serious. The story is standard, thinly set up, with uninteresting characters. There's really nothing to them that's worthwhile. One blessing, though, is that the story is very non-invasive. Cutscenes are short, everything can be skipped, it never interrupts you while you're just out in the world playing, and you can go for hours without seeing anything story-related. Tonally, Rage 2 is all over the place. Like I said, the marketing sells it as being very wacky, and peripherally, the game gets there. Weapons, combat abilities, vehicles, aesthetics of part of the world and enemies have a lot of personality and color. The game also quite literally has a lot of color in it, which is great after Rage 1, which was possibly the drabbest game I've ever played. Parts of the story feel like they try to inject some of this personality, specifically these out-of-place freeze frames that occur whenever a new character is introduced. Your car also talks like a robotic lady and is sassy to you, and I have no idea why.
I'm checking into the clinic. Wait for me.
Across the board, the tone and writing style of Rage 2 seems disjointed. It feels like a self-serious game was made, and then they started throwing in aspects of goofiness and parody, but never fully committed to it, which is a real shame. The marketing sold it as being absurd, and there certainly is absurdity there, but I was really hoping for a full commitment to it. This is a tricky game to review for me. I've talked a lot about parts of it, both big and small, that are flawed. It's a game that I can lean back from and acknowledge as being a bit of a disjointed mess. It's a game that I can understand someone bouncing off of for being frustrated by the open world design. It's a game that is largely mediocre. But so few of the problems I've talked about actually bothered me because the core of Rage 2, the combat, which you spend the vast majority of your time doing, is exceptional. It took about an hour for the game to click with me, and I've now played nearly 20 hours of it, and I've had an absolute blast the entire time. I have a huge number of enemy outposts and camps to take on still, and I'll probably end up doing all of them. And when more content comes to the game throughout the year, I'll be booting it back up and playing it because I have such a tremendous time with the combat. So how do I end this? How do I score it? I'm not sure. I guess I'll decide it in the edit. One thing I know for certain is that I've had more fun playing Rage 2 than almost any other game this year, so that's gotta be worth something.